taken. I think it is the process of self-actualization and also the empathy part, the concern for others. I remember reading a book by Hillary Clinton where the title of the book is that it takes a village to raise a child. And it is so well written and it is so true that we take so much from society, whether in terms of influences or experiences or in terms of being what we are. Even today, if we analyze what we are today and why we are today, I think it is largely the societal influences which makes us what we are. But very often we fail to recognize that fact, and it is here where the concept of volunteering becomes so very important in our lives, and particularly in today's world which is strewn by strife and conflict. I would say when it comes to volunteering, it's a different experience. We talked a little in the opening session why we volunteer, what it does to us. Although volunteering, a person takes to volunteering to impact society, to make a difference in the lives of others, but in return it is the person who's a volunteer, volunteering himself, or a volunteer who gets changed in the process. And I think it is both transforming others and we transform ourselves. It is the process where we rediscover ourselves. It's the process where we see ourselves where we are in our own personal growth and development. I think it's a very important part of creating very cohesive personalities. We at the governmental level, we deal with two main broad streams of volunteers. One is the NSS, as mentioned earlier, the National Service Scheme, and the other is the Nehru Yuva Kendra schemes. National Service Scheme was started in 1969 and we have it's more in an organized form in high schools and colleges, and we have spread out in about 40,000 units are there in 391 universities. It's a huge network of college and school going children who form the National Service Scheme, working in different areas, whether it's health, education, awareness creation, or flagship schemes of the government. Likewise, we have the Nehru Yuva Kendras is much broader, more for it could be in school or out of school children, youth, basically from 15 to 29 years of age. We have about 8 million volunteers in more than 3.5 lakh clubs. Of course, out of this 3.5, about 1.25 lakh are most active ones. And we see that even their activities, although we have formed these two volunteers to improve their personality, their character, and also leadership development. But largely it is two ways how volunteering functions. You give something to the society, in the process you gain something. And this has been a very important element, although I feel we need to do much more at the governmental level and with maybe organizations like Caritas, where and other NGOs who volunteer, we could come together to form a huge, I think, social capital that we are looking at and break the barriers that are there in the community in unification. When it comes to global volunteering, yes, our volunteers have little experience, although we give them international exposure, international cooperation, or in terms of conferences and seminars. But if we see the real projects where we work inter-country, where we work across borders, where we work in more pessimistic situations or rather needful situations, I would say, the experience is limited, but nevertheless global experience. When I come from my personal experiences, I went to Rio in Olympics last year and I saw a child running to me from a distance while I was watching a match, and as he comes closer, he just came and asked me, "Are you from Jaipur?" I said, "Yes, I am from Jaipur." He said, "Yes, we have seen you as a divisional commissioner." And nothing could be more heartening than being, not just being recognized, but seeing a young volunteer who's traveled across the country and in a different alien land, he is seeing someone of his own and how he relates himself to me. I think it is one big experience globally when they travel, when they learn, there's much more learning, there's much more confidence gain. But I would say, similarly, my daughter was studying in US, she was learning her economics, maths and Chinese language. She was in China for 2 summers. She was basically there to improve her language, and she had already come up to level 5 in the Chinese language, and she took to volunteering in China. And the volunteering, the job she was doing was she was teaching the senior citizens the language classes of English. And with the result that she not only taught English, but she improved her Chinese in the process. And I think it has been a very, very rewarding experience. But when we come to, let us come to globally volunteering, how does it function? I know when it comes to nations across boundaries, there are many challenges in volunteering. And it is these challenges, how we respond to these challenges, and there are many barriers, and how do we break the barriers. These barriers could be cultural, or it could be in terms of policy objectives, how different nations are placed, or politically how we see volunteering from one nation to another. And also it could be more of a, even financially, how we do the international volunteering. And I would just request, because to make this session a little more meaningful, just to pin up or flag the challenges that are there in international volunteering, and how do we respond, or what needs to be done to really make volunteering a meaningful experience both for the giver and the taker.
Yeah, I think the previous session has set pretty high standards in terms of the messages that we received, both spiritually as well as inspirationally, in terms of what has been said in all the religions and what is that we are practicing in our respective lives. It is pretty difficult in terms of bringing the global experiences in 5-10 minutes, but I'll try my level best to comprehend to the jazz issues on the reflections on the current status of volunteering, why we do it, how we do it, how better that we can do it. I'm so thankful to Caritas for inviting me for this event, and we have been partnering with Caritas so far, I think, in a number of projects. Recently, we have concluded a program on food security, which is a regional program where we implemented in India, Nepal and Bangladesh, and Caritas is continuing beyond our EU support for the next phase. And this particular initiative is also part of the EU initiative on EU program on volunteering. It is a global initiative for EU aid volunteer program. So before we touch upon the topic, I just would like to signal what we are doing in India. EU as an institution, we are committed to the development in terms of the primary objective is the eradication of poverty, and in the current context of SDGs and Agenda 2030. So we have an ongoing program with a number of civil society organizations on variety of sectors, and majority of which is led by civil society organizations across India. And globally, this EU consensus on humanitarian aid, there is a paper which talks about the way that we respond to emergencies, and there is a new consensus on development, taking into the priorities of SDGs and the Paris Declaration. And EU established the voluntary humanitarian aid corps, which is called the EU Aid Volunteer Initiative, under which this particular program is funded, which informs the commitment of EU in terms of development as well as the voluntary sector globally in terms of both resources as well as in terms of devising policy framework for EU to set action. Personally, voluntarism, what we heard before and now, to me it is a value system. It inculcates, it's rightly said by the previous religious leader, it inculcates the compassion, without which I don't think that we can be qualified to call as a volunteer. The selfless service, the dedication, the commitment that we look at for addressing an issue. So it is a value system, be it at home, whether we how we practice amongst ourselves, amongst our kids to share things, how we practice in a society that we live, and how do we take these values in the institution that we belong, be it religious institution or the organization that we work with, or the ability for you to take lead and volunteer in each and every opportunities that you comes across. So it is primarily a value system that needs to be inculcated. In India, I think we don't need to, there is excellent examples pre-independence until now, like Sal Satyagraha or Bhudan movement or Safai Karmachari Andolan. Now, I think you are going to hear some of these speakers today and tomorrow, and some of the movements which are actually driven by voluntary principles. Of late, you will see the emergence of political parties also emerge from the principles of voluntarism. So, there are a number of examples in India in terms of how it, influenced the social change in the country through this movement. And it is ingrained in our culture, it is ingrained in all the religions that we practice, whether it is Hinduism or Christianity, every single thing it talks about the contribution, the service to humanity. This is probably one of the main principles if you see as a country which has diverse religion, diversity in terms of languages. Probably this is one among the important reasons for us to have a vibrant civil society. We have millions of civil society organizations in India, primarily for the reason that people wanted to contribute, people wanted to connect, people wanted to bring social change. The sheer size of the sector, the number of registered organizations in India, and the sheer size of youth in India, probably if you look at the potential of voluntarism is quite immense in terms of what they can offer, what civil society needs in terms of addressing the social changes. I'm not sure whether it has been rightly tapped currently. The number of platforms which government has initiated, particularly Ministry of Youth Affairs has started the National Program on Volunteering. A number of civil society initiatives starting from VSO or some of the platforms which actually connects volunteers and organization and help in terms of bringing these resources. So this is something which one part of it which I would like to share, but very particular to the question, I have my own personal experience of mentoring a startup. Some 5-6 years back, I had an opportunity to mentor a youth who wanted to do volunteering actually. He is good in photography, so he wants to go to US, so he needs to have in his CV that has some experience in volunteering, and he wanted to. So the purpose is not actually selfless, it is primarily for him to get a stamp that okay, he has done some volunteering. When I probed the person like, why do you need to do? What is that it is going to bring change? He's good in photography, so you want to teach kids photography. So how does it make difference to kids? You can teach a kid photography, but it ends up without having any resources for the kids to practice it, then it's not going to make big difference. It probably gives satisfaction to you, but may not necessarily have certain contribution. But why don't you think about using photography as a means to create social change? So that's where it started the conversation. Finally, end up seriously setting up an organization, running around. So the idea is, the important element over here is those who are already into volunteering do know how. They are committed, they are compassionate, they know to do, they have time, they have resources, they have expertise, and they want to do. So we don't need to do anything much on just the platform. Having whatever the right kind of platform, if there is a enabling environment which facilitates this, people who already wanted to do volunteering would continue to do volunteering. But if you look at the current situation over here, the potential of volunteering is quite immense considering the number of youth in the country, and many do not know that they have the ability to contribute. There is no space, there is no mechanism. So this is the clear example what the startup has started. So photography, if you go to Delhi universities over here, you take St. Stephen or Hansraj College, excellent photographer, young guys, 17 years, 16 years, who have fantastic, amazing pictures they can produce. They put it in Facebook, they put it in Flickrs, and they go on competition, win some awards. And 100 people say like, awesome pictures, great, well done, excellent, and it just dies. The picture could be on street food, it could be on bird, it could be on wildlife, but the value of such pictures just ended in the social media issue. So the idea of this startup was, can you bring this expertise for non-profits who are actually wanting to communicate what they are doing? So that's how it started. And when these guys understand that their expertise can be meaningful rather than just going junk in Flickr and Facebook, and they have done around 40 to 50 projects, and they produce a number of publications and raising awareness on fat rate, raising awareness about child issues in Delhi slums. There are two changes which I witnessed. One is the direct contribution of volunteers into the organization, where they felt acknowledged, they felt valued by the contribution is one. But much more than that, I would say, is that the change which happened in the volunteer, who never thought that he would volunteer at all, that change was probably a long-term sustainable change. So what is important now is how do we create a climate? How do we create platforms? We need like hundreds of platforms. How do we create such platform where we communicate to the young audience that you have potential, you have skills, you have passion. Can you convert your passion into compassion? So this is one area where I think probably in global experience, if you look at, there are many such online platforms and many such means of engaging with it has been integrated in institutions in many of the corporates, international organizations. But I think this is something which is the need of the hour for a country like India, whether it is in non-profit organization, whether it is corporates. How do we structure, how do we organize this volunteering into our existing institution, as well as creating and enabling platforms which exploits the potential of youth in the country. So I'll stop over here, and if there are any questions, then I'll like to take it later. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a fundraiser, so this will go maybe in a slightly different direction than what you've heard thus far. I'm also able to bring a global perspective because I'm British born, a Canadian citizen, and I'm resident in Italy, so I definitely bring a global aspect to volunteerism. Volunteers are quite simply the engine that drives the charitable sector. While not everyone has the capacity to donate funds, we all have the ability to donate our time. Whatever that time is, if it be many hours or it's limited, when all volunteer time is combined, it has the ability to be a game changer and have enormous impact. Volunteer work within Caritas is one of the pillars of our organization worldwide and at every level. As James in chapter 2, verse 26 so succinctly says, "For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." Volunteers donate their time, their technical knowledge with dedication and joy. This gives life to the work of Caritas. They find in popular education the necessary force and instrument for the construction of the so-called fair, fraternal, supportive society. They become the defender of a sustainable planet, empowering groups of peoples or communities to participate in decisions that affect them. In literal terms, volunteers are the backbone of civil society, who provide extensive skills, knowledge, and labor that fill the gap between government structures, or lack thereof, and the necessary resources required to build better, sustainable communities or to support the most vulnerable in our society. A rising trend in the charitable sector is social impact investing and social enterprises. This emerging form of income generation is being encouraged by Caritas Internationalis and indeed the Vatican throughout the Caritas Confederation. Businesses that align with the organization's mission are an excellent way to generate income and employment for the unemployed. My experience has been, while there's often an amazing idea or opportunity to engage in these activities, there is not always the expertise on hand at the staff level to launch a successful enterprise. Enter the volunteer, who brings to the table that expertise and the training required. The business might be a school, a cafe, a restaurant, shop selling vintage and used clothing, or any one of hundreds of different ideas that are springing up around the world to provide much needed revenue and job training opportunities. I know of an orphanage in Nairobi funded almost exclusively by social enterprise supported by volunteers. The charity created enterprises such as a semi-private school and catering services, which both support the orphanage and generate revenues. In addition to providing food for the orphanage and lunches for the school, the catering service handles weddings and parties, bringing in additional income. Meanwhile, a shop outside the gate sells second-hand clothes. While these enterprises have generated the income that funds the orphanage, they would not exist without the volunteer pediatrician who tends to the children, or the volunteers who assist the staff. It's interesting to note that in this case, only one full-time staff person raises the funds and oversees the management of these business enterprises. Obviously, the volunteer component is absolutely priceless. My professional work over the past 30 years during and before working with Caritas Internationalis has been focused on resource mobilization, primarily in Canada. In addition to the Aboriginal populations of Canada, the country's been largely settled by migrants coming from Europe and in most recent times from all over the world. In the early days, those migrants, or pioneers as we call them, had to survive in very harsh winter environments. Without volunteering and helping one another with crops and barn building, they would certainly have perished. This early hardship and reliance on others developed a culture of giving, tolerance, and support that has shaped the country to be what it is today. A welcoming environment for migrants who receive the resources they need, largely delivered by volunteers. This social safety net would have had very large holes in it without the work, kindness, and compassion of countless volunteers. Volunteerism in Canada, like India, is rooted in historical, social, and religious traditions. Because of these factors, volunteering has become a way of life in Canada. In Canada, volunteers have shaped society. The country would not function and prosper without this enormous network of volunteers who help people in a myriad of different ways. So how does one harness the power of volunteers? How does one nurture, respect, acknowledge, and benefit from what the volunteer willingly offers? Whether you're building an organization, a school, a church, or dealing with a crisis or emergency, you must follow the same process to build your volunteer core. That core of stakeholders in your project will engage and very often have a greater commitment and passion, in my experience, than the professionals being paid to turn the concept into a reality. One must first identify where you need skills and experience to fill the gap. One must articulate the commitment you're looking for and the nature of the work. You find out amongst your friends, colleagues, and acquaintances who are the best individuals to fill these necessary roles, be it healthcare workers, architects, lawyers, accountants, teachers, farmers, or perhaps manual laborers. To assist you in recruiting those individuals you must also seek the support of people who have access and influence in the community, who believe in what you're doing, who might in fact be the parish priest or bishop or some other religious leader. One of the challenges of the volunteer sector is that people are becoming busier and busier, leaving insufficient time to develop to families, let alone to give as a volunteer. This is one of the ways that the corporate sector can become involved. Long before corporate social responsibility came into being in a formal context, Canadian business played a big role in the charitable arena. Not only does the business community support charitable work financially through donations and sponsorship of events, but also they provide qualified expertise to engage in a governance role, build capacity through supporting management development process and systems, and perhaps lead a strategic planning process shaping the organization's mission and vision. They also use their influence in the community to generate broader support and recognition, including media coverage. Many businesses in Canada have programs that allow staff to engage in volunteer work on company time. Examples are helping out at lunchtime at a food bank, or having voluntary employee payroll deductions for charity and matching gift programs where the company matches the donations made by staff, whether it be financial or volunteer time. These initiatives help strengthen the resolve to be supportive of community projects and programs and to foster volunteerism. Collectively, volunteers from all walks of life, from the grassroots to the corridors of power and corporate world, can shape the political agenda and bring about change. At Caritas Internationalis, we're currently rolling out a global campaign on migration called Share the Journey, launched by His Holiness Pope Francis in September. The Share the Journey campaign calls for a culture of personal interaction by encouraging local communities and individuals to facilitate spaces and opportunities for migrants and those who fear or denigrate them in order to meet, to listen to, and learn from each other's stories and experiences rather than fall back on negative stereotypes. Volunteerism around the world, including young people, is playing a big role in this campaign. If the message delivery is successful, it will be an enabler of social change and attitudes brought about by a collective desire to create a fairer and just world, and shows the extraordinary power of volunteerism and working together as one human family. To those of you in the room who are volunteers, and I hope that means everybody, I thank you for the gift of your time, knowledge, and expertise, for caring and for making a difference. Thank you.
Privileged to be here. Very humbled by this experience. Just speaking of global perspective, Nigel, I'm of Sri Lankan descent, born in Malaysia, live in Australia. I'm Buddhist, my wife is Catholic, my children are Buddhists. So, like that. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to take a slightly different tone. Instead of bringing Caritas Australia here, I'm going to take you to Caritas Australia. Caritas Australia is very much like Caritas India. We're 50 years old and built very much on the energy, the compassion, the passion of volunteers. I wouldn't be standing here today on behalf of Caritas Australia without those energies and the compassion of the volunteers. And this goes through essentially generations now. For you, those of you who don't know Caritas Australia, we've got presence in 28 countries, we've got 93 long-term programs, 109 partnerships all over the world. We've got 10 offices all over the world. And in terms of our program expenditure, we spend about 20 million AUD, and our income is 38 million. We've got 102 staff, paid staff, but volunteers, we've got hundreds, if not thousands, all over the country. The reason why I'm telling you this is because everything we do starts with the energy of the volunteer. Yeah, and this started 50 years ago. I'm going to tell you the story of Caritas Australia. So, around June 1964, a group of Australians under the Bishops' Conference came together and started the Catholic Overseas Relief Committee. And their goal was to distribute funds that they raised in the parishes to distribute overseas. That became known as Project Compassion, which is a 6-week fundraising campaign that happens during the Lenten campaign. Now that Project Compassion has grown because of volunteers all over the country. And in 1966, Project Compassion became an entity on its own, run by Australian Catholic Relief. And then in 1996, Australian Catholic Relief became Caritas Australia. We very much depend on the work of volunteers all over the country. And in Sydney, the head offices, and in some of the capital cities, we have a few paid staff. But essentially, the engagement with the community, the fundraising, getting our message across, campaigns, and the fundraising happens through volunteers, right? So, as you know, we fund Caritas Australia and Dikti Foundation here in India. And a lot of that kind of resources will come from the work and energy of volunteers. The Project Compassion, that picture on the left and the picture on the right shows the generational change as well as the generational stability. The Project Compassion box is an institution in Australia. It actually represents volunteering in Caritas Australia. Every family, Catholic family that goes to church would have a box like that where the children will just put coins in, right? And that would go. So that spirit of giving starts very early on in their lives. Just on the side, the gentleman with the beard on the left, that picture was taken about 1974. He just recently passed away. But the fact that I'm talking about him here in India shows the impact of contributions goes across time. It's so powerful. I love this picture. Have a look at this picture and tell me, who do you think lost the coin toss? Yeah? A lot of our work is done by volunteers to get our messaging out in the community. The chap that drew the short straw, who's in the box, yeah, he would have spent the whole day in that box, walking around the streets of streets of Sydney, to raise the profile. These are the things that we all have to recognize. Sometimes you give up your dignity for the greater good, yeah, but it's definitely appreciated. Our volunteers participate in events and share public awareness with the general public who may not know about Caritas and the work that we do, the campaigns that we run. This is a fun run that was done in Brisbane a couple of years ago. A lot of our fundraising is based on volunteers giving up their time to do public, to do fundraising activities. This is a pancake sales for Shrove Tuesday that we have every year, right? And so all of these young people have made a decision to give time and energy to Caritas. Sometimes we forget the steps along the way. We only think about the actual giving, but before that, there's a series of steps that the person goes through before they actually give their time and energy. There has to be the intention to want to help. That is when the flowers start blooming. Then there must be the means. All of these kids, these youngsters, these teenagers, They don't just happen to be there. They make the energy, they take the trains, they take the buses to get there to do work for Caritas Australia. These are all things that show it's not just the idea, but the execution of the idea that is just as powerful. A lot of our fundraising actually revolves around food, by the way. The other aspect of our volunteering is it's intergenerational. We have many, many hundreds, thousands of kids, school children in our school system that give their time for Caritas Australia. Now again, that is not recognized as such. Volunteering, can have an intergenerational impact. The children that, the school, I call them children, but they're not children, the teenagers, the young, the youth, who are giving their time, they grow up with those values. They share those values with their children. Then their children start, replicating, doing new things. So it's such a powerful intergenerational aspect to the work. So all of these schools, all of these children, they give about 2 weeks of volunteering a year in whatever way that they can. Yeah? A lot of them, as you can see, it's the fundraising. So a lot of the money we raise is usually through community engagement like this. And it's so inspiring to see, young children with the energy that they bring, the laughter. We forget about the laughing. One thing I love about, participating in the events is that it's not serious. They laugh, they joke, they make fun of themselves, they make fun of us oldies. Right? But they go back, they go away with so much more. We go back with so much more. And I think we always have to remember that. Yeah. Volunteering is a joyful experience. And it's something that has to be experienced. Now, behind the scenes, there's a lot of serious stuff. Yeah? The world that we live in is changing. And therefore, there is also the worldly aspects to volunteering. Yeah. In Caritas Australia and in Australia, child protection is a very, very important aspect of our work. And within the church, the bar is raised even higher, and we strive to meet those standards. So every one of our volunteers will have to do police checks every month. Yeah? Every one of our volunteers will have to sign a code of conduct about how they are expected to behave and how they are expected to protect the dignity of children and the most vulnerable. That is very, very important. Yeah? Every one of our volunteers, we expect a cultural fit. They need to understand the context. If they are going to wear our t-shirts and represent our values, then we expect them to also respect and represent the level of duty of care that we provide. Now, this is critical. What we don't want, where we are unable to manage the risk and provide a minimum standard duty of care of the people who give their energy and their time for us. So we also have to protect them and make sure that they are in a safe space and they provide safe space for other people that they're working for. As a result, we decided some time ago that Caritas Australia will not place volunteers overseas. We made that decision consciously because we felt we were not in a position to manage the risk of the people that we put overseas. There are other organizations who are much more specialized in that, and therefore, we put people in contact with those organizations. We also feel that, volunteering is a responsibility. It's an engagement between people. Therefore, we need to have the right fit. And therefore, it's not so much the net gain for the volunteer, but net gain for the organization that is welcoming the volunteer. So we need to make sure that there's that cultural fit there. And a lot of our partners feel that the volunteer, they would prefer kind of more longer term skills and longer term stuff. That is why we made the decision that we are not in that position to put volunteers in international deployments. Yeah, but there are definitely organizations who do that, and they're more specialized in that. But just the thought process of going through that and knowing what we can do well, and what we don't do so well, and as a level of responsibility and duty of care, we make those policy decisions. When we engage a volunteer, every one of our volunteers will have to sign a child protection policy. They will have to sign a volunteering policy. In Australia, where there's a culture of litigation, we have to make sure that there's a workplace and health and safety policy. We've got anti-discrimination policies, workplace bullying and harassment policies. So these are all things that we have to do to protect the organization as well as protect the person and others that they may engage with. Yeah? We try and do it in a way that respects the spirit of volunteering. You can kill it very quickly if you want to. And that is something that we strive to ensure that the worldly aspects are done, but the spiritual aspects of volunteering is protected and made sacred. Every volunteer will get an induction pack. They'll sit down with one of our team and they'll go through. What we want to do is to convey the spirit of Caritas and what we expect. But to be honest, we are the ones that get conveyed the spirit of volunteering. Volunteering is infection. The spirit of volunteering is infectious. It's very mathematical. You can't subtract. You can only add and multiply. That's why, when you have volunteers in your organization and they are there for the right purpose, they are there with the right intention, they are there with the right spirit, you cannot fail. You can only grow. You may change, but there will be growth and benefit to the wider humanity. So, I thank you so much for having me here. It's been a privilege. I look forward to listening to all the presenters later. Thank you.